Norm Roberts has retired. KU now has an opening in the assistant coach realm. Are they going to hire within? Could they go externally? Could it be a former Jayhawk? And could they use this opportunity to maybe groom the next Kansas head basketball coach?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening? Derek Johnson here with Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to all your everydayers tuning in to each and every episode of the show. We're free and available on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show or anywhere that you get your podcasts. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're breaking down Norm Roberts retiring, one of the assistant coaches who's been a mainstay on the sideline next to Bill Self. It'll be a different face next to him on the sidelines. So we'll get into a little bit on the coaching staff, who could replace him. Would they dare go for a former Jayhawk? Would they dare go for somebody who maybe they can groom to be the head coach in waiting down the road? We'll get to all those and if that does make sense or doesn't make sense on today's episode, plus the latest news around the transfer portal and a little KU football as well on today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 wins with FanDuel. So Norm Roberts has retired from college basketball, and he had served 14 seasons as an assistant coach at Kansas, 37 total seasons of coaching for Norm Roberts, and he's a member of the Assistant Coach Hall of Fame. I think this is one of those things where at this point where KU is, it's probably good based on how these last couple of seasons have gone to kind of mix things up and get some new blood in there. That's what the opportunity presents itself here. The Kansas is going to have some opportunity to, get some new voices in there, get some new blood in there, mix things up a little bit and prevent things from getting stale from where they've been the past couple of years. At the same point in time, I don't say that to like point a finger that, the struggles last 2 years are because of Norm Roberts. No, that's not all what I'm saying. Norm Roberts has been a very successful assistant coach for this Kansas basketball team, and he did an excellent job with KU. It's one of those things where it can be good from both directions, and you celebrate the time that he had where he was very good in coaching KU, the kind of big men. He also was somebody who filled in for Bill Self when Bill was, either suspended from the IRP self-imposed, suspension stuff that Norm Roberts was the one who coached Kansas to a Champions Classic win. And then it was Norm Roberts having to coach Kansas with Bill Self having the heart condition that caused him to coach Kansas in the Big 12 tournament, in which they won the first two games and lost the Big 12 championship, and coach in the NCAA tournament in 2023, in which he did get, a tournament win under his belt before that close loss to Arkansas. So he filled in that way, but also he was, originally on the KU coaching staff in 03-04 when Self took over. I think he and Self started together with like Oral Roberts back in the mid 90s, but eventually he got the head coaching job at St. John's and ended up being the head coach there for 6 seasons. He ended up rejoining Kansas in the 2012 to 2013 season, and then was on the Kansas sideline from then on until, this past season. And like I said, I think he did an admirable job. I think he did a very good job for KU is offering. I think at the same point in time, you now have an opportunity to have an opportunity essentially here if you're Kansas. Now, here's what Bill Self said. This is a bittersweet moment for me because Norm and I have been together since 1995. Norm has played a key role to our success at all of the stops we've had together, especially here at Kansas, from recruiting to developing players to scouting, and his knowledge of the game, both on and off the court. Norm has been instrumental in what we have achieved. We won a lot of games together, many conference titles, deep NCAA tournament runs, Final Fours, and the national championship. We've had some unbelievable memories that will last our lifetimes. And Norm Roberts, definitely somebody who has a very dry sense of humor. Him and Curtis Townsend kind of two peas in a pod in that regard. And that I'm sure will be missed in the locker room for KU kind of from there on. But here's what Norm Roberts said. He said, I want to thank everybody at the University of Kansas and from everywhere I've been lucky enough to coach. I've been fortunate that I've never worked a day in my life. Being able to coach at Kansas and be part of this program has been unbelievable. After 37 years as a coach, it is time for me to move on, enjoy my family, spend more time with my wife and sons. The thing I'm going to remember most is the players and watching them grow, watch them succeed, and watching them fight through adversity and come back from that. And you'll hear, if you go back through, especially some of the best, senior day speeches of the Bill Self era, I guess, so to speak. A lot of them, might mention Norm Roberts or bring him up in different ways and in him being instrumental for, them being there or to their everyday and the behind the scenes stuff of being their, coach on the practice court. And that, Norm had a very big imprint on the success of Kansas during the Bill Self era, to say the least here. Now, the result of all of this is that Kansas obviously has another opening in the assistant coach realm here. And for Kansas, it's one of those things where if you look at the basketball roster, there's a bunch of guys listed as assistant coaches, but not all of them. I think there's a rule on how many of them can be sitting on the bench. I forget if it's 3 or 4 or what the rule is there. But basically, you have your top assistants, your top 2 or 3 or whatever, and then you have other guys who are assistants who might be doing, things. It could be a director of player personnel. It could be something as simple as video scouting, right? There's a lot of different areas that you can help, helping out with practice, whatever it is, right? But Norm was one of the main assistants, right? And so you look at it, and Kansas obviously has, like I said, a lot of different people who are listed as assistants, but they weren't one of the main assistants on the bench or on the roster. And so you go to the roster, you see Curtis Townsend, Norm Roberts, Jeremy Case, Joe Dooley, Chase Buford, Fred Cordelbaum was the director of basketball ops, Brennan Bouchard, director of scouting, Doc Sadler as a senior advisor. I think you view it as, okay, Curtis, Norm, and Jeremy Case, those were the top 3 guys as being those top assistants on the bench this year. So Norm goes away. So is it just going to be an internal promotion? Could it be Joe Dooley, somebody who has former head coaching experience and kind of a similar path with Norm Roberts, being a guy who assistant coach with Bill Self, goes off, has head coaching experience, comes back after, getting let go at his previous school. Could it be Chase Buford? I think that's the guy that a lot of people would point to, and the one that I would probably make the favorite at this point in time based on just the path of what you brought him along to possibly be. And being a guy who won a couple NBL titles in Australia. And I think he won a title in I think at the time it was the D League, and now it's obviously the G League. This is a guy with a lot of success as a coach, and you don't become just a secondary assistant at Kansas to not be able to move up that line and have an opportunity to later, be a head coach at college basketball and maybe turn into a head coach in a mid-major, if you have a good year as an assistant this year, or whatever it is, right? Or could he be groomed to be the next head coach at Kansas, stuff like that, that it makes sense for that to possibly happen for him, that, to kind of move up into that role. But maybe you could go external for the hire, right? Maybe you could bring somebody in from outside to kind of slide into that role. Or if you do bring on Chase Buford, for instance, then you slide somebody else into Chase Buford's role in that situation. So there's a couple different avenues that you can kind of go down here for assistant coach, but there are some interesting names if we are just talking about former Jayhawks that could slide into this position. And I guess let's start right here. Do I think it makes sense for Kansas to hire someone now they have this opening that can be the next head coach? They can be a head coach in waiting, right? You see that at Creighton. They hired the, I think it was the High Point head coach to be their assistant coach and be their head coach in waiting, following Greg McDermott. Or we've seen it before with kind of like Roy Williams and Hubert Davis. And I don't know if that was officially a head coach in waiting. I don't know. I feel like it was, but the writing was on the wall. Now, I go back to the head coaching episode that we did, and we went over stuff, and I think Bill Self wants Chris Beard to be the next head coach. So that would mean that he probably doesn't want to groom someone. And honestly, I'm not really under the guise of you have to hire somebody with KU blood. Bill Self didn't have KU blood, and it worked out okay. Or you have to hire somebody within. I don't think you have to do that. Now, if the best candidate possible happens to be those things, then great, sure, right? But there have been a lot of teams that have done that, and it hasn't totally worked out in their favor. So that's not something I'm all in on. But if you're going to go down that road, yeah, like I said, Buford does make a little bit of sense to kind of groom in that way based on the success he's had before. It seems like he's somebody who's analytically inclined, so I'd like to have that, on the staff a little bit more. And yeah, maybe he can be somebody that, can draw that ire from the athletic department and stuff like that. What about Jacque Vaughn? I don't think Jacque Vaughn has a job right now. He just got done being the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets till 2024. He was in Brooklyn since like 2016. He was also head coach of the Orlando Magic. Maybe he'd be on board with being like, hey, I'll be an assistant for a couple of years. And then I've always heard that the KU athletic, I mean, obviously KU thinks highly of him, right? That he would have a shot at the job. I don't know that he'd get the job or that he'd have, the top opportunity to, but he'd certainly have a shot at it. And so what better way to introduce yourself if you think that's possible and get a guy to get acclimated to the current way of how things go at the collegiate level, then bring him on as an assistant. What about Aaron Miles? Now, Miles does have a sitting job. He's an assistant coach with the New Orleans Pelicans. Would you really want to go from being an assistant coach at the NBA to being an assistant coach at college? I don't know. That one becomes a little bit more difficult for me to see. Like, we've seen some guys, the Utah head coach now, BYU's head coach now, were assistants in the NBA, and they got head coaching jobs at the Power 5 level. So, like, I'm with Aaron Miles. I'm like, would he really take that job? I feel like, if anything, he's maybe waiting for a head coaching job in the NBA, or if he wants a head coaching job in college, I feel like that would be the next move. But, that would be a great hire if that could certainly happen. And dare we say Frank Mason, who posted an eyeball emoji on a Monday afternoon after seeing the opening. And he has kind of been very vocal, I would say, on social media, that he would love to be a coach at Kansas. And maybe he would make sense if you are sliding up, Chase Buford into that one of those main 3 assistant coaching roles. We've seen past players in this role before. Jeremy Case, before he got promoted up to one of the main, coaches. Brett Ballard was a former player that was kind of not in those main 3 assistants, but was, one of the further back assistants. Brady Morningstar was part of this. If Frank Mason wants to do that and try to earn his way up the coaching ranks, I think that totally makes sense too. So some interesting ones you could go to in-house. What about if you went out of house necessarily? And also, I don't know. I think there's one that, maybe this would be a little controversial. Danny Manning. Let's discuss that next. Welcome back to Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in on the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and to win big. You can bet early on some college football lines. They actually, not only do they have the Heisman and national championship and, conference winners and win totals and stuff like that. If you have a great lean about, hey, Ohio State's playing at Michigan on November 29th, and I got a great feel for it, Michigan's getting 5.5 points, you can bet on that game early over at FanDuel. And that just shows the detail and the level of sophistication that they go into, that you can get that far in advance. I mean, shoot, you can get the Kansas State game already, I should say, which I think is being played in Ireland, with Iowa State getting 3.5 points on August 23rd. You can do that and plenty more over at FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If you win, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks. Thank you to everydayers tuning in to each and every episode of the show. Don't forget to make Locked On College Basketball or Locked On College Football your second listen every day. So Norm Roberts retires, and I think Chase Buford probably the favorite to be moved up, but that would still leave an opening and further back that you'd have to backfill. There's going to be names out there that I'm sure that, assistant coaching is one of those things where it's a little bit harder to find names out there, find a hot board necessarily, than it is with like head coaches. Head coaches, you see the resume, it's like, oh, you went 25-10 at Southern Illinois or whatever it is. Like with assistant coaches, there's so many names out there at so many schools, and it's hard to tell what exactly is each assistant coach doing. This is something where I think athletic departments and head coaches have to have a better feel and a pulse on, where they're being connected with some of these different areas. But okay, I teased Danny Manning there, and I hated that I said it's controversial, because Danny Manning is the most accomplished player in KU basketball history. And when he was an assistant coach with Kansas, he did so well coaching the big man. The reason it's controversial is that he hasn't had the most success, I would say, as of late. But I think more so the lack of success with Danny Manning coaching is more about his head coaching than it is as an assistant coach. Again, you could say, okay, most recently he was with Colorado, who was bad this season, and before that he was with Louisville, who was really bad the 2 seasons he was there. I mean, how much is the assistant coach changing the trajectory of a team when the head coach is just not good or the roster is not very good? I more so look at it and say, okay, when Danny Manning was an assistant coach, when he was coaching big men, do you think he could teach other big men something interesting? Because here's why I find it interesting. Norm Roberts was coaching the big men for Kansas. When Danny Manning left Kansas as an assistant, he was coaching big men. And, it's one of those chicken and the egg things where it's like, okay, Danny Manning had a lot of success coaching big men at Kansas. Um, and it's one of those things where it's like, how much of that is him? How much of that is just that these dudes were NBA talents, Darrell Arthur and Cole Aldridge and the Morris twins and Thomas Robinson and Jeff Withey? I would like to think when you see the progression of some of those players, like what Darnell Jackson got better at as he went on, Sasha Khan got better. I think Cole Aldridge got better. I think the Morris twins definitely got better. I mean, they weren't, top 30 recruits in the country. T-Rob definitely got better. Even though those were future NBA players, they did get a lot better under Danny Manning. And so if Norm Roberts was coaching the bigs, I almost look at that and go, okay, you have a guy, Norm Roberts, who, again, took that path, was an assistant for Bill Self for a while. Danny was that with Kansas, goes to be a head coach somewhere else, ends up getting fired down the road, and eventually makes his way back to Kansas. And I look at Danny Manning and I say, yeah, okay, I don't want, to get this twisted as, oh, Danny Manning, should be the next head coach at Kansas. Like I've always thought that stuff was crazy. Again, it doesn't have to be somebody with Kansas ties. Bill Self was not, Roy Williams was not, and that stuff worked okay for Kansas. But do I think Danny Manning could be a good assistant coach who coaches the big men, which was the positional coach of Norm Roberts? Yes, I absolutely can. And it's hard for me not to look at Floyd Badunga, who's this super raw prospect, but has all the athleticism in the world, has good shot blocking ability, has good rebounding ability, and go, hey, don't you think a big man who knows what he's doing and knows about, being a proficient offensive scorer and working on their offensive game, don't you think that guy might help that other guy who's a possible first-round pick? And so I think Danny Manning would be a home run hire to fill in for Norm Roberts there if that was the situation for KU. The other guy that his name, if you've been reading message boards or looking around the interwebs, I guess, like it seems like Mike Boynton has been a name that's been dropped a few times here or there. That one would be interesting. Again, a guy who was a former head coach at Oklahoma State, was an assistant for a while. This past year, he was an assistant at Michigan, and I don't know what specifically like positions he was coaching there. But like he also wasn't like a terrible. I think that's honestly the theme though. Like Norm Roberts didn't do like a bad job at St. John's. He was just let go after 6 years. Like he was just fine, right? With Mike Boynton, that was kind of Oklahoma State, and he kind of got screwed by I don't know, maybe not the COVID year. I don't know if they would have made it or not, but they were 7th in the Big 12 that year. But like, he ended up 21-15 NIT quarterfinals year one. His 4th year, they go to the second round of the NCAA tournament. They got screwed by the NCAA, honestly, in which kind of hurt them and making them ineligible for the postseason. Made another NIT quarterfinals. He was fine, but like, with Boynton, I think he also has ties with Brad Underwood, who Brad Underwood and Bill Self, I believe, are tight. So maybe there's some connection down the grapevine there. And with Boynton, I always, when he was at Oklahoma State, I always appreciated kind of the guy he was. So, I'd be for that one too. He'd bring some newer blood in. I don't know enough about like, how has he been recruiting? How important has he been to Michigan in bringing in some of their different recruits? And how important was he to Oklahoma State in bringing in some of their good recruits? Obviously, people would want to point to Cade Cunningham. I think, didn't they hire like his dad or something like that? So I don't know if that one counts as like he was just an undeniable recruiter. Then again, isn't it mostly just about money now anyway? But point being, Mike Boynton, I guess another name to watch. So if we see some other names to watch, we'll relay them here on Locked On Jayhawks. What is some of the other latest news, though, going on around KU football, the transfer portal, some Jeff Long news? What? Former KU AD? We'll get to all that next on Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. They have fast and easy hiring where you post a job, it's free and simple, and within a day, with multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com, UPWORK.com, Upwork.com to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Thanks for joining us again on Locked On Jayhawks. And again, don't forget to make Locked On College Basketball your second listen every day. All right, a little football news. Keyan Burnett, who is the former Arizona tight end transfer, came to KU, spent spring ball with him, was in competition with Deshaun Hanicka for the starting tight end job. Certainly would have been a big snap count player for KU and gave a big ceiling to the tight end position for KU this season. Well, he entered the transfer portal kind of last minute, and that was probably the toughest loss the KU's had to deal with in the transfer portal from the spring portal. If you go back to the winter, does it count? Because then it's just a zero-sum game, but it would probably either be him or, DJ Warner. I don't know, maybe somebody I'm forgetting right now. But he ends up going back to Arizona where he initially left. So I don't know if it's is it homesickness, right? He's originally from Southern California. I don't know. But he ends up back at Arizona. So that's unfortunate for KU. We'll see again still if this late in the game, they're able to scramble and find another tight end to kind of replace him. Because right now you're going to be counting on some guys that, maybe weren't going to be planned by the coaching staff to be thrown in the fire just yet. But, they're going to have to be thrown in the fire if nothing changes, if nobody's at this point in time. And, sometimes that stuff can be a blessing in disguise because maybe you get a young player who ends up, the opportunity presents itself and they show out, and then you feel like you have a young player who turns into something, and this was kind of the start of that, and that'll be the hope for KU. Also in college football news, Jeff Long. Yes, former KU athletic director Jeff Long, known for the most popular quote, "In what regard?" and known for, Snoop Dogg things and funeral stuff. If you know that one, you know that one, and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, basically just, not a great time for KU athletics. Anyway, with Jeff Long, he is rejoining the college football playoff committee. He was originally on it when he was the AD at Arkansas. So this is another go around for him that he's a little bit familiar with it. And I don't know, man. To me, the college football playoff committee already has, certain faults and flaws, and now they have more, I guess is what I would say about that. Some basketball stuff to get to as well. Florida is no longer pursuing Desmond Claude. Neither is Kentucky. And so Claude, it looked like signs were pointing to Florida, which makes you wonder, did Florida back off because the price is too much? Are these teams backing off because the demands are too much? Is he asking to be the primary point guard at these schools, which is kind of what he played at USC, but before that was more of a wing. And some of these schools are like, no, we view you more as a wing. And he's like, no, I want to play point guard. Or is it a money thing? Or is it, I guess I don't know what it would be besides those, but the fact that Florida and Kentucky, Florida just won the national championship. Kentucky made the Sweet 16 on a brand new, legitimately fully brand new roster where Mark Pope did an excellent job working the transfer portal. If these teams are being hey, we're not really interested. If it's a money thing, that's a different conversation. But if it is about fit or some sort of conversation or what he wants not lining up with other things, it probably would take him out of the run. It doesn't seem like Kansas is really going full court press on him anyway. It seems like Dame Sarr, which apparently the right way to pronounce it is Dame, by the way. Seems like him and Darian Williams and RJ Landry, all these guys are higher up on the list anyway. But that certainly gets paused. That on one hand, it's oh, he's more available, and maybe the more teams come out, maybe the price goes down, and maybe it's a more doable thing. On the other end of things, it's kind of if some of these other good schools have worked well with the portal, maybe that should be a hint to, maybe there's more there than you might think. And then the other piece here is a junior college player who is Demarion Van Kelly. He is generating interest from many different schools, according to Revo Recruit: Ole Miss, Virginia Tech, Texas A&M, Maryland, Missouri, Nebraska, South Florida, Kansas, and many more. Very good three-point shooter at the JUCO level. I think he was only a freshman, so that gives you possibly 3 years left to play. And as you're looking to fill out the roster for Kansas, what are you looking for? Developmental players and or three-point shooters. And he would kind of knock both of those, give you the opportunity to provide both of those things. And maybe the fact that he has played at least, a year of JUCO ball makes him a little bit more ready that maybe he could be, that Jalen Coleman-Lands role at the back end of the rotation if all kind of works out right away, or worst case, he's, at the end of the bench and just gives you another shooter that's nice to have and fill out the practice squad and the rotation and the depth and anything like that. And, gives you 3 more years, possibly 4 if you redshirted him, of play. I doubt that's, his goal necessarily, but I don't know, maybe one to watch that maybe we'll get a little bit more into on a future episode. That'll do it, though, for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. Make sure to like and subscribe to the show. See you next time with LOJ.